Good morning, Dr. Jose Almeida here, coming from Rypt Gym for our third newsletter. Again, this is Embracing Repetition, our video newsletter series to educate our gym members to enhance their training. I'm Dr. Jose Almeida. I'm a managing member, and together with the Xenia Orquin, we're pleased to bring you this new video. Go to our YouTube channel on Rypt Gym, and there are two previous videos which looked at carbohydrate metabolism. Today we're going to talk about protein metabolism and muscle growth. We're still working on, a view from 50 feet. As we go along every 2 weeks, I'll give you more and more information. We'll get you in the nitty gritty. It could be a lot of repetition so that you really get the concepts. I'm a vascular surgeon. I've been practicing Miami for 20 years, and I'm a bodybuilder. I've been on the master circuit competing for 10 years. Although I've been a gym rat all my life for 38 years, been lifting weights when I played ball. So I do like this stuff, and I'm pleased to bring you this new information on muscle growth and the role of protein. So let's get to it here. This is a muscle cell, and all cells have nuclei. They have cytoplasm. The functional unit is a myofibril. And as we take a closer look, this blue is a sarcoplasmic reticulum around the myofibril, and the yellow is the T-tubules, and we'll go into that in a second. But the basic unit is a myofibril, and through thin filaments, which are made of actin, and thick filaments made of myosin, these slide along each other to contract or relax. This requires energy in the form of ATP, and it's thought that the microscopic damage that occurs through weightlifting and loading the muscle is what causes it to grow. It's the process of repairing the muscle that causes growth. So inflammatory mediators go to the sites of muscle injury and produce stimuli. Some of these are anabolic hormones, so anabolic processes synthesize or make things, and catabolic processes make things down. So in the case of muscle, we want the anabolic process to outweigh the catabolic process. So in order to do this, protein synthesis is required. These are heavy in protein, and we'll go through protein a little later. Actin and myosin are contractile proteins, and troponin and tropomyosin are also proteins. So the skeletal muscle is made largely of protein. The muscle grows through hypertrophy, which is the growth of individual cell, and there's even evidence that it may grow through hyperplasia, which is growing new cells, and this is thought to be through recruitment of satellite cells. So skeletal muscle is voluntary. We also have cardiac muscle and smooth muscle, which are involuntary. Cardiac, of course, the heart ticks on its own. We don't have to think about it. And our gut, small intestine, has smooth muscle, which is also involuntary. But skeletal muscle, like our biceps, triceps, quads, we control them. In order to do that, we have to have a signal go from the brain through the spinal cord and through individual nerves. They innervate the muscle. This innervation is called the neuromuscular junction, and the actual site of contact is what we call the synapse. So the nerve has to talk to the muscle, and it's a chemical language. So acetylcholine is released by the nerve ending and binds to receptors on the muscle membrane. This causes a depolarization reaction, and an action potential goes along the membrane into the T-tubules. And when it goes into the T-tubule, the interaction then with the sarcoplasmic reticulum causes calcium to be released. And it's calcium that then binds to the actin's thin filaments to expose its active sites. So what does that mean? That these red lines are representing tropomyosin and troponin, which actually keep the actin covered and inactive. But in the presence of calcium, these move over and expose the binding sites to myosin. These are the thick filaments here. And it acts like little cranks. It just grabs onto the actin and cranks along. So this is a motor action. It requires energy. And we go back to our friend ATP, which is our energy currency that we've talked about before in carbohydrate metabolism. So this is kind of what it looks like. These little cross links just contract or relax, and it's myosin and actin, these proteins that are in action doing that. Just to give you a little more information, we've talked about ATP a lot previously. The molecule's made of adenine, ribose, which is sugar, and the 3-phosphate group. So the cleavage of this bond is what releases the energy. So when we're contracting the muscle, that's one thing. When the muscles relax, that's another state. So with peak contraction, with a lot of weight, that's intense activity. And with intense activity, sometimes we go through an anaerobic process. Depends on the fiber type, which we'll cover in a different lecture, but we're usually activating fast twitch fibers with heavy training, intense heavy training. And so in that case, since oxygen is not used, the glucose will get broken to pyruvate, but pyruvate, instead of going into the mitochondria to the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain, which requires oxygen for oxidative phosphorylation, in this case, no oxygen's around, so pyruvate gets converted to lactic acid while it makes only 2 ATPs. This lactic acid is then released. It was thought before that lactic acid is what caused the soreness, but I think the newer thought now is it's really the micro tears in the muscle that cause the pain and the muscle soreness. Also realize there's a phosphocreatine system that also produces ATP, and it's a lot of phosphocreatine present in muscle. And through an enzyme called creatine kinase, ATP is formed, and basically it's the phosphate from the phosphocreatine that gets transferred to adenosine diphosphate, or 2 phosphates. That third phosphate comes on in the presence of magnesium, creates creatine. So this phosphocreatine to creatine reaction generates ATP. That's its purpose. So we can generate energy in the cell through the phosphocreatine mechanism or through anaerobic metabolism. When we're resting, we want to store energy. So if glucose is not around, remember glucose is our first source of energy. The body will go to glucose first, burn it by making pyruvate into the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain to make ATP. But if no glucose is around, meaning that insulin levels are low, so usually after about 2 hours after a meal, insulin got released, and now the glucose went from the bloodstream into the cell. Now the body will go to its second tier. It'll look to fatty acids for energy, and that's what we want. So the muscle will start burning fatty acids in the mitochondria through beta oxidation to produce ATP. All right, so that's the building of the energy. So that's why we need our carbs to replenish our energy so that we can make more ATP to do the work of muscle contraction. We gain our protein through food and our carbohydrate through food. We've touched on that before. So what types of foods? Well, protein down here. So the highest proteins would be over to the right. And as you can see, that's our egg white, salmon, beef, and chicken breast is the best sources of protein. But if you're a vegetarian, no fear, you can get protein through tofu, kidney beans, even oranges, bananas, broccoli, oatmeal. So through a rich diet, we can get everything that we need: protein, carbs, minerals, vitamins. These are all important. That's why if you're a good eater, you really don't need supplements. If you eat every 3 hours and eat what you need to eat, it's all there in our food. Supplements are really what the word is if you don't eat enough, or you're not an eater, you don't like to eat, and you need to bring in these minerals and amino acids through other sources, and that's where supplements may come in. But that's really their role. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins. So in order for protein synthesis to occur to build our muscles, we need amino acids. So what are amino acids? Well, they're protein breakdown. So we eat, again, our protein. We eat the chicken breast. It goes into the stomach, and the stomach pepsin is around to start the digestion process. And then that food, broken down, goes into the duodenum. And the duodenum is where the main protein digestion occurs. These are enzymes released by the pancreas through its exocrine function. So trypsin, chymotrypsin, carbopeptidase is released into the duodenum from the pancreas, and that breaks down the proteins even further into smaller peptide units. If there are 2 amino acid residues or 2 dipeptides, A tripeptide is 3 amino acid residues. So the point is, by breaking down the protein, it can now enter the cell. Of course, it needs to be transported through the cell membrane, through transport proteins, and there's different transport proteins along the brush border of our small intestines in order to bring in different size amino acids. If we have excess amino acids, they are not stored as proteins. They're actually either used as energy, so through a process called gluconeogenesis, proteins can be converted to glucose and be used for energy, or if they're not being used, then they'll get stored as fat. So even if we eat too much protein, it'll be stored as fat. If we don't consume enough protein, then the body will look to protein to break it down to the body's proteins and break them down for energy. So that's really what starvation is, and we'll get into ketone bodies in another lecture. So the amino acids in the cytoplasm get built into chains called proteins. How does that happen? Well, the cell nucleus is really the CPU of the computer. Testosterone is one of the main stimuli to say, hey, cell, make muscle proteins. So what that means is that in our nucleus we have our genes. Our genes are in the form of DNA. Through a process called transcription, the message on the DNA gets transferred as a messenger RNA. The messenger RNA now leaves the nucleus, goes into the cytoplasm, and binds a ribosome. When it binds a ribosome, it ticks along the ribosome, and transfer RNAs will bind these. There's going to be 3 exposed sites called codons. The transfer RNA will bind the codon, and based on the instructions on the messenger RNA, it will have brought the appropriate amino acid. So each amino acid gets linked one at a time to form peptide chains, and the peptide chains get linked and folded to form proteins. So amino acids, through a process of transcription and translation, get built into proteins. These are regulated by hormones. The main one is testosterone. There's other ones, growth hormone, thyroid hormones, epinephrine, that help regulate protein synthesis. I just put this up here to show you that testosterone is actually made from a cholesterol backbone. So another reason we need to take in fats is our testosterone is made from a cholesterol backbone, a fat molecule. So in summary, if you want to get big muscles, you have to lift heavy weights to cause micro tears in the muscle that need to be repaired. In order to repair them, you need to take in food. The food needs to contain an energy source or a carbohydrate, and it needs to contain protein, which is going to be your source of amino acids to build new proteins. The main proteins in muscle are actin and myosin. These are contractile proteins, and that's really what we're trying to do. We'll continue along this journey. If you'll stick with me every 2 weeks, we'll get you one of these every Tuesday morning. I think next time we'll get a little more detail into protein and muscle building. The ultimate goal is building big muscles and burning fat, and that's what all the lectures will be tuned to. But as you can see, there's a lot of information, and we're just covering the surface, and as we keep going, you'll get a lot of repetition, so you'll start understanding this more and make good choices. For example, which supplements to choose and why, and if you need them at all. So why spend money on things you don't need? It's going to be food as your best friend and heavy weights as your friend in cardio. All right, Jose Almeida from Rypt Gym. Hope you enjoyed this. Go to our YouTube channel and subscribe, like us, comment, send comments via email, and we'll try and get them in the next lecture. Thank you for your attention.